Hello and welcome to another episode of Mentor Musings. I'm JC, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Brett. Hey, Brett.
Hello, everyone. Hey, JC. How are you today?
Doing great, doing great. Let's get to work. So, Brett, what I want to talk about today, I think it's a subject that's going to really impact a lot of entrepreneurs, not just ones that are at the later stage. When you launch a business, I feel like you're managing two businesses. One is the business that you are and kind of the business that you're launching, and the other is the business that you kind of aspire to be. You're kind of going through a constant stage of metamorphosis. And so I think what is to be expected for founders as they go along this journey is experiencing some growing pains. Sometimes that could be bottlenecks on the operations side, it could be on the execution side, but at various points through your venture, you're going to experience these kind of bottlenecking challenges. I think you actually, Brett, I've heard you give a great metaphor before about founders hitting a sound barrier. And I think you've used it in the context of sales, but I know it also applies to so many other things. So let me ask you first, Brett, these sound barriers that founders and entrepreneurs have to break through, what are some of the examples that you can think of that they should expect and kind of think about encountering along the way?
Yeah, it's kind of that inflection point of the business, right? It's a fine line balancing between, we say it all the time, working on your business or working in your business. And as you're getting started and you're starting to grow, you're going to wear many different hats, or most people do, right? Because you don't have the money, you don't have the momentum yet to be able to start bringing folks on unless you raise money early on. And that's a whole different discussion. But let's assume for the argument that, hey, you're building this, bootstrapped in the early days, the founder's going to be busy in a lot of different roles. And what I've found historically, either folks I've worked with or interviewed on the podcast, is the inability to let go of certain tasks, right? You would almost think intuitively the other thing, hey, this is what I'm good at, I'm going to get other people to do these tasks. But inherently it's the other way around, that it takes founders a long time to start to let go of some of the tasks that they're doing every day. And it stalls momentum versus, increasing the momentum of what they're trying to do. And I think that inflection point with the sound barrier, a lot of folks get stuck and it's hard to let go. It's hard to find the right folks. And typically, so long-winded answer to your question, but no, I appreciate it. And I think it is a really interesting point for a lot of founders. And I'm sure you've seen quite a few examples as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting. I always tell folks, to your point, Brett, a lot of people would assume that founders try to release responsibilities too early, but in fact, they end up holding on to them too long. Another way that I like to put it is, the founders who are successful figure out the right jobs in which to fire themselves from first, right? Like you hire yourself and you hold all of these roles, but you've got to rapidly deploy kind of firing and replacing yourself as quickly as possible. I do think that's an important thing to note. But yeah, I mean, the types of sound barriers that they can encounter is number one, prolific. I mean, it could be sales, operations, recruitment, product development. It could be because you as the founder who are doing everything don't have the skills, knowledge, or capacity to be able to do more. And so that's why I think the main focus area, regardless of the part of the business it's on, is that you as the founder or founders are likely the bottleneck. You are likely the source or the cause of some of those growth pains. And so as you think about kind of the next subject that I want to talk about, how to resolve them, it's actually, kind of thinking inwardly and kind of introspecting about what you're doing or what you're not doing and how to resolve it. So let's talk about if founders are the typical source of that barrier or that bottleneck, what are some tips and best practices that you can suggest as far as how to identify before you hit that sound barrier, that sound barrier is coming up? Like, how do you know as a founder intuitively that, hey, I might be coming up at something that I need to start addressing before it becomes a major problem?
Yeah, I wish there was a magic formula for it. And I hate to use the it depends, but I think one of the biggest tools that founders they're starting to think about it, because, almost to a business, you're going to make some pivots as you're growing your company, right? It's just going to happen. And the challenge becomes, if you're so deep in doing all the tactical every single day, you're not seeing the bigger picture. And I think where I like to start breaking it down is, if you've got some momentum, you've got some customers, you're starting to get feedback, you got to start leveraging that feedback and looking, even if it's 6 weeks, 6 months down the road, starting to plan and say, all right, how do we get to this point? But the ones that don't ever get there, that end up burning themselves out, are so focused on the tactical, and they're the reactionary to what's next. And it's a balance, man. You got to figure out where to spend your time. But if you're not spending any time thinking about the future, no matter how near or even longer term, you're going to really struggle to break through that threshold, because you're going to be so involved in the day to day that you're not going to be able to get out of it without either the business falling behind or looking at what's next. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would completely agree with you there. I think it is important to be anticipating where those barriers are going to be. And it can be difficult. There's not one size fits all answer. I mean, I've heard, in the investment world, I've heard venture capitalists and angel investors talk about the founder CEO having a threshold of revenue usually. And it varies a little bit depending on the skill and scope of the founding team and the primary founder. But I've heard it most, I guess, directly equated to a level of revenue. And it kind of depends on, are you direct to consumer or business to business? But, it could be 5 million, it could be 50 million, it could be 500 million, but there usually is a threshold of revenue that will ultimately dictate how far or when you're going to start experiencing bottlenecks. And probably it's not just because magically that amount of revenue generates those barriers or those bottlenecks. It's because operationally, to deliver services at that or those scales, probably you have so much going on in the organization that it's kind of those other things that are contributing to that revenue that's holding you back further. So I've heard it most easily equated to a level of revenue, but again, it's not some magic formula or threshold that, okay, well, I'm at 4,999,000, so I need to get ready for my 5 million. It's not exactly that, but I think it's more kind of the contributing operations and the scalability of operations that's going into reaching those revenue thresholds as you sell more products or services. So I would try to earmark and think about, where you think those revenue targets are. I know for a fact investors will anticipate that. When you're looking into bring institutional investors on, they will think, how far can this founder CEO go? And for them, I think they're typically looking and kind of creating an approximate line of, okay, probably this size of organization, this size of revenue profile.
Yeah. And maybe another way to frame that a little bit too, because, I was kind of looked at it from the revenue side, but, where a lot of my conversations and work has gone now is, with those founders and startup founders, selling into their network. And then once you're starting to try to reach folks outside of your network is when that may be a good line of, when do I need to start separating? Because the way I look at it, and I've been using a tagline more recently, from startup to scale up, right? So the startup is, hey man, you're hustling, the founder's involved with everything. You're starting to scale up. And I think there's a junior scale up stage, right? From the 500,000 to million to the 10 million, where you can't do what you've been doing, right? You can't just hustle and get the next customer. You've got to start putting in some basic foundation and process into your business. Then once you get to 10 million, give or take, then that's a whole different level of complexity and process you need to get in place to get to 25 and then 100. And so as you're starting to think of reaching beyond your customers, I think you can look at it from a revenue or customers or who your customers are, to start to think, all right, how are we going to be able to process this and get it to kind of the next level? And, it's not for everybody, but I think if you wait until you're in that scale up phase, it's going to be really hard. You're going to be working backwards and trying to as they say, paving the road as you're driving down it at 80 miles an hour. So just a little bit of upfront to think about it as you get to that point will save you a lot of time and energy and headache.
I love that, from startup to scale up, Brett. That's an awesome way to frame it. And I think one of the things for founders to remember as you transition from startup to scale up is that it is much harder to manage a succeeding venture than a failing venture. And again, I think, a lot of people, if you ask them the question, kind of like earlier about holding on to or relinquishing duties too quickly, I think other people, when you say that, they would say, oh no, it's much harder to manage a struggling business. No, it is much simpler to manage a struggling business. So the point is that if you're a founder and if you're in the early stages and you haven't hit one of those barriers, you need to anticipate that if things are going well, that these are kind of not uptown problems, but they are challenges that you want to be anticipating having. And so this is really, I think, what we always talk about, Brett, I know with our relationships with founders, but others as well, the importance of mentors.
Yep.
You probably, as a first-time founder, or at least a first-time founder for your venture, don't have the perspective or the optics to know when or how to anticipate. So having mentors and advisors that can say, hey, based on my experience, I think this is the point at which you're going to start experiencing either a knowledge or a resource or just a capacity issue. We need to be thinking about that ahead of time. And it can be an easy thing to put aside. You're not tackling the challenges of tomorrow. You're trying to survive and fight the challenge of today. But remember, the scope of what you're trying to do is much bigger picture. What good is tackling today's challenge successfully if you're going to fail tomorrow's? There's no point, right?
Right.
So you do need to have mentors and advisors that can help you be thinking about and anticipating where those are coming, so that way you're not just fighting today and ultimately losing the battle tomorrow.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And I think you can get so wrapped up in the day to day that, again, all of a sudden 3 months go down the road, you're running out of money, you don't have time. So it's, like I said, it's a balance, and it's art more than science. But I do think you can apply some science and some fundamentals to get you thinking about a little bit bigger picture. So yeah, so I think really good advice.
1000%. Any other thoughts or suggestions or tips on this topic, Brett?
No, I'm sure we could go deeper for another 30 minutes, but is trying to keep true to our format, give folks something to think about. And yeah, please feel free to reach out to us if you have specific questions. Like I said, this is a good problem you're going to have if you're getting to this point, but it makes a lot of sense to think about it ahead of time versus doing it on the fly. So.
Absolutely. We're going to, like you said, Brett, we're going to stay true to our format. It's micro musings or mentor musings, not mentor dissertations. So,
exactly.
As Brett mentioned, everybody, thank you for listening in. If you've made it this far, please like, comment, subscribe, share content with others. Listen, if you're a founder and entrepreneur, it's on you to be part of the network, to be able to share information with others who might need it. So please, post this, broadcast this, send people our way, reach out with questions. But as always, Brett and I are here for you and want to help anything that you are tackling. But until next time, we wish you the best of luck with your venture and talk soon.
Yeah. Cheers. See you next week, JC.
Cheers.